Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the latest episode of Broken Oars Indoors. Now, at this point, I would normally say, Aaron, who have we got on today? But I'm not going to do that because I'm going to take particular pleasure in announcing that we have the returning conqueror, Mr. Harry Brightmore, world champion Cox of the Great Britain men's 8-man rowing shell. Harry, congratulations and welcome to the pod. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
That's the first thing to say. You're now a world champion. That can't just be another sort of like pot in the cardboard box in the attic. That has to be quite a big one.
Yeah, I mean that is very special. It's been a sort of culmination of many years work, and it's something that when I started rowing as like a J13 sitting around in a playboat and falling into the water, it's something that you sort of watch on telly and you think, oh, that could never be me. But I've sort of just stuck at it year on year, and every year's got a little bit closer to the goal. And yeah, to come away with a world championship goal it's epic. Yeah.
Have your feet actually touched the ground yet? Has it actually sunk in that you are now a world champion? It must feel. Has anything changed, or is it kind of occasional realizations? I'm a world champion.
I have sort of come back down to earth a little bit in the last couple of days. I was chatting to my dad the other day, and I sort of likened it to like when you have a birthday and someone asks you, do you feel a year older? And it's like, well, no, but I know that I am. So I know that what we've done is pretty special, but I think just being surrounded by people in the team who have eyes looking forward already, it sort of keeps you quite grounded, because there's obviously an eye on the Paris Olympics, and we know that the task that we've set ourselves from now on, having sort of set a standard, it's going to be quite difficult from here on out to stay at the top. We've got a target on our backs. So, yeah, I think it's obviously epic, but we just can't rest on our laurels, really. So I think that's sort of started to get me a bit more grounded.
Redgrave used to have this thing that, world championships are like stepping stones to the Olympics. And I think Tim Foster and James Crackle, when they won their first one in the fall with him, were like, we're world champions. And Matt and Steve were more like, yeah, and it's kind of, it's almost taken as read. Obviously, we don't take that as read anymore, because there's been a period of turbulence at GB rowing. But is that mentality of like, it's great, it's nice, but Paris is we're stepping on towards Paris? Is that still there? That kind of sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's we have Steve Trapmore as coach of R8, and obviously he has gone through that sort of period with a lot of those guys, and in his run up to Sydney maybe wasn't quite as smooth sailing from the outside as like Steve Redgrave. I think like he was up against a pretty hot USA all the way through up to the Olympics. But I think the lessons that he gives us are like, do keep us all with our feet on the ground. Like he's, never happy. Like, I mean, yeah, from the outside, the 8 has been winning everything all season, and we'll have come off the water and Steve will have been like, yeah, that was good, but X, Y, Z, and we'll go back and we'll work on X, Y, Z. And it's sort of, we've never had the chance to just sit back and reflect. And I think we've got a bit of time to do that now, but I think already eyes are being sort of cast forward, and I don't think anyone's particularly happy to settle for World Championship gold just yet.
Fair enough. Could I just ask, you mentioned the sort of like the messing around as a J13 in little playboats. Where was that? Was that just Chester or?
Yeah, so I learnt to row at the King's School Chester. So we were on the River Dee there. It's a great stretch of water, very long stretch as well. It's, you know, I think they used to have the junior trials there way back in the day. And they used to have like GB junior training camps up on the Dee as well, quite a while back. Yeah, great stretch of water. I had a great coach called Neville Orme, who he's retired since then, and a chap called Paul Townsend, who's now coaching over in Cambridge. Yeah, both of them are not at the school anymore, but yeah, they really sort of set me on my path and made me fall in love with the sport.
So just to kind of wind back, what was your pathway into rowing? Were you kind of an all sports child growing up? Was it a sporty parent? Was it someone at school? Or what actually got you on the pathway to rowing first?
So my dad's very sporty. He did a lot of football, athletics, rugby when he was at school, and sort of from a young age, I got pretty stuck into football. Played a lot of football. Played for school, played for a club outside of school as well. Just like every waking minute, I did football, and in the summer, I'd do athletics as well. I was fairly handy at running. Did a bit of triple jump for the school as well. But I think I got to about 12, 13, 14, and kids my age were starting to grow, and I wasn't growing, and football got really, really hard. Like one of my sort of bigger like skill sets of football when I was that age was I was really, really quick, and I was a lot quicker than my position. And usually I wouldn't really have to get into much physical contact because I'd be able to just sort of nip people off the line and get ahead of them. But as you know, as is the way, boys my age started getting taller, filling out, getting stronger, getting quicker. As the stakes got a bit higher, I found it more and more difficult to sort of use that tactic, and I ended up just getting muscled out of the sport, and it was a bit of a sort of hard period because I loved my football, and I was sort of seemed to be just going down and down the ranks, and it was really, really difficult. And I thought, well, you know what, I'll just try and give something else a go, and signed up for a rowing team for like a summer holiday camp, and yeah, was mucking about in playboats, playing in the water, usually falling in. It was nice and warm in the summer, so it wasn't too much of a problem. And the head of rowing at the time was saying, you know, I'm sure you're having fun, but I think we can try and get you on board as a Cox and try and see if you're up for that. And I didn't really think much of it at the time, because at that time I was thinking, well, this is, you know, just something to take my mind off ultimately trying to get back into football. So I started coxing at the start of the next term into like J14s, and I just ended up loving it. I sort of likened it a bit to like a captain kind of role, like on a sports team. And you know, I quite enjoyed actually trying to rally the guys together, set a common goal, and try and work towards something, bit of sort of problem solving. And sort of just got into it through that. And then the next year for J15s, I ended up actually just stopping football and just sticking with rowing.
Fair enough. Okay. Right, now, the question we've got on our schedule is a slightly controversial one. As a Chester native, do you consider yourself Northern, and do other people around Chester consider you Northern?
I don't consider myself Northern, but I've now spent quite a lot of my adult life living in and around Oxford, Reading, Thames Valley. And I think everyone thinks that if you live above Birmingham, it's the north. So
Fair enough.
I think of Chester as the Midlands.
Aaron, above Birmingham.
The thing is, Harry, I'm a Northumbrian native, and I obviously, lived in London and Manchester at various points. So I basically think anything that's south of Gateshead is a suburb of North London, and Chester is. If you're a Mancunian, you think of yourself as being as northern, but Chester's kind of nice and middle class and kind of, it's down south essentially. Let's be brutally honest. Loon and I rode for Agecroft, so we know the D quite well. So we because it was, you have the head and you also have Chester Sprints and Chester Regatta, and we were there. One of the hallmarks of the measures that we put on rowing is not how many world championships you've got, but asking, have you ever done Runcorn, and was it in the rain?
I have done Runcorn quite a few times, and I think there was one where it wasn't in the rain.
Yeah, it always.
And I don't know what it is, but the rain almost kind of makes it.
Yes, it does.
It is synonymous with Runcorn Head.
It's part of the magic.
It is.
No, I was just. I mean, okay, right. It's partly been an ongoing joke in the pod, but it's also like, I don't know, slightly like a serious question. I mean, is there something of like intrinsic value of being a rower who's grown up and like done those kind of rounds of kind of local regional head races? You've slogged through winter training. Do you find it sort of gives you something of a connection to the sport?
I would say absolutely, yeah. Because I think one thing I've always sort of found throughout every level of doing the sport is that ultimately, you are just doing the same thing at every level. You're just trying to go quickly, and like I've made so many acquaintances and actually lifelong friends from, filling in for an 8 that's racing at Agecroft Head, and how my dad rows, and he picked it up after I started at school, and he rode for Royal Chester, who I'm sure you'll be familiar with as big Agecroft rivals, and yeah, so I would always fill in for and Cox Vets crews, and I'd do rowing in the dark with the lights on and all the stuff that everyone else in the country is doing. It, I think, to miss out on that, you don't really get the full experience of everything that rowing in this country has to offer. And I think I appreciate that I'm actually very fortunate with that I've had that breadth of experience, but it's also just really good fun. Going out with the lights on and you can't even see the oars. It's, you don't need to be worrying about technique, or you just need to be worrying about not hitting the bank.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just good. And you get that sense of community. And then, doing those sort of the local regattas and the local heads where it's all volunteer run and everyone's there just to enjoy doing the sport. And I think once you get above a certain point in the sport, to that elite level, you do miss that. It's not really the same. You don't have that same sense of community. You sort of lose that a little bit, and it's all geared towards absolute performance, which that's obviously the way that it's got to be. But that's not to say that there is a lot of fun to be had and a lot of value in that sense of community with those local races. That's really, really good fun.
That kind of brings us on to, I mean, we wholeheartedly agree. It's part of the the grassroots and the lifeblood of the sport. But was there a point as you progressed in the junior ranks, Harry, where you thought, actually, I'm going to be quite good at this? And then was that part of your thinking? Was rowing part of your thinking in going to university as a kind of? Were you thinking in terms of pathway through?
I think so. at junior level, I did trial for juniors. I filled in for the final trials when I was in J16s. So it was sort of agreed that I wasn't going to be under any sort of, like, I wasn't going to be up for selection of anything. But I think I just went for the experience of it, and I ended up ranking quite highly. And I thought, oh well, actually, like, could be onto something here. So I did it, trialed again the next season, and I got sort of slapped down a bit and fell off the selection pathway from the Easter trials, which is around sort of halfway through the season, regatta season, and that sort of knocked my confidence quite a bit. And later on that season, I signed up to do the to trial for the home international regatta for Wales. Managed to get into that, had a great time, and that sort of like built me back up again. And then I trialed again for my upper sixth year, where I was a bit more successful, and I went to the Munich Junior Regatta after the Easter trial, and then ended up racing at the Coupe de Jeunesse at the summer. And I think it's sort of, that was a bit of a defining point, because actually having gone to the Munich Junior Regatta and then going to Coupe, I was really, really annoyed that I didn't make it to the World Championships. And I think from that point, I was a bit like, right, well, I want to try and remedy that, because I felt like I was good enough to do it. So choosing universities, my first choice was University of London, because that year they just won the Prince Albert Challenge Cup in the Cox 4. And that was, so I was quite keen on going there. And I did get in, and I went for a couple of months, but I didn't get any accommodation, and it was very expensive. And I sort of, tried to reapply to another college to see if I could get into some accommodation there, but things just fell through. So I was kind of looking at my options, and the Oxford Brookes coach got in contact with me and said that I could start a course there in the January. And I thought, obviously, at that time, it wasn't quite the powerhouse that it was now. But I sort of thought that it would, it still be actually really, really good fun, and it's quite close to everything. And there's a lot of rowing going on in the Thames Valley, so I agreed to do that. And I was, again, very lucky that was happening at a time where things were really starting to snowball at Oxford Brookes. And I think from there, in my second year, I got picked to do under 23s. The year after that, we had a really strong Henley campaign that fell short, and it just started happening that, like, year on year on year, there would always be like an extra feather in my bow, and it'd be an extra thing to work towards. It was an extra rung up the ladder. So I think it sort of came from that upper sixth point where I was actually really, really disappointed about what had happened at the final set of junior trials. And then also, looking back, maybe I wouldn't be here if I'd stayed at University of London as well. It's sort of quite funny, isn't it? Looking back at points in your life and you think, well, what would have happened if I'd done this or done that? And so, I think things have just fallen into place a little bit, but there's definitely a lot of hard work and determination from that point.
Fair enough.
Could I just dive in, and this might be a slight tangent, Blue and Harry, as we move forward.
Really, a tangent, Aaron.
A tangent.
Have you ever done one of those before? That's unusual for you.
It's very rare for me, and I just want to pick up on a point that Harry made, if that's okay. You talked about football, and I got the sense that it was really important to your sense of self-identity, and there was a real sense of disappointment when something that you didn't quite make it as far as you wanted to with that. And when we talked to Dan Armstrong, who's the coach at Tyne United and also at Durham, he talked about the way that in junior athletes, kind of your identity becomes wrapped up with what you do. and rowing is a tribe. You know, we tend to self-identify as rowers once you're kind of in the sport. Was there that feeling with you when you lost football? Did you feel like you'd lost a part of yourself, and did rowing kind of replace that and then become part of the identity, and that kind of sense of progressively building through the ranks from University of London and then Oxford Brookes, and each year getting a little bit higher up the ladder, that kind of, it's almost a part of your, it's replacing something that you lost, but it's something that's now intrinsic to your identity, really identifying with it and with yourself?
That's a really good question, actually.
I occasionally do them, but it's not very often.
No, I'm trying to sort of like dig into myself to work that one out. I think stepping away from football to rowing, I don't think I lost any of my identity with football. I still follow football avidly. Might disappoint some people here, but I'm a pretty strong Liverpool fan.
Oh well, you and Dan Armstrong will get on fine.
So I mean, I still followed football avidly. I still went to games and stuff, and I still had that love of football even when I wasn't playing it. I think it was a bit of competitive fire. I think that was more the case. It was like coincidental that it came with football, and I think I found that again with rowing and with being the role of a Cox. And, you know, at the time, like Steven Gerrard, big hero of mine, and, you know, trying to sort of like watch him on the pitch. And, you know, I feel as though that kind of figure, that was sort of a bit of a figure of what I was trying to portray with my coxing and rowing. And, you know, someone who's sort of trusted and someone who calls the shots and someone who like not only just asks for things from people or gets things, it's someone who tries to like lead from the front. And I think, you know, that was the identity that I was trying to get my teeth sunk into. And I think I refound that along the way with rowing.
So again, is that like, you mentioned this of like, you saw yourself in coxing as like being the captain of a team.
Yeah. And
I mean, again, it's, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm wanting to ask, like, so, you know, when you're in the selection races for Coop or for Junior Worlds or whatever it is, what are you trying to do that's different to everyone else? But it seems as though clearly part of it is an absolutely psychological thing, and that you're trying to, you know, you're trying to get 8 guys, these like 8 walls of meat, basically. You know, even J18s these days are just massive, and bring them together as a unit. I mean, do you see that as like one of the big parts of your role as a Cox?
100%. Yeah, I think it's, you know, sometimes it's not always what you say, but how you say it. It's a bit of a cliche, but I've known so many Coxes that I've met along the way who maybe actually haven't been, you know, the most technical, or they haven't known tons about the sport, but they have been phenomenal Coxes because they just have the gift of the gab. They have this personality that just draws people in, and people feed off them, and it just changes their, you know, their aura, their atmosphere, and it just brings the best out of people. And I think, you know, there's definitely value in that with coxing. You know, quite often I think having someone who knows all the answers and has the answer to every issue that crops up in a rowing boat, but is very timid, comes across as very unconfident, will usually be outdone by someone who doesn't have a clue, but is actually just really cocky and gets a firm grip of the crew, gets them all together and just gets them doing one thing. So I think there is definitely something to be said for just that, getting all of those guys to do the same thing. it's a challenge, but it's
at the same time,
it's,
and ignore the pain.
It's kind of a force of personality thing. It's a force of personality because, I'm beginning to realize, how well drilled we were at Agecroft. At the time, we probably didn't realize the benefit of what we were getting, but we were taught that our coxers were an intrinsic part of the crew. And I think Lou and I have probably both been at other clubs where coxers are kind of treated as add-ons, and the boat tries to run the cox. But it was quite interesting to see people like, Maddie and Lucy and Valerie and people like that at Agecroft, quite small ladies, utterly dominating very, very large men, in that sense. The cox is kind of part of your squad. Is it this as you move up through the levels? Because our coxers were there when we trained, they're there when we raced, that we socialized together, we did everything together. Is that the same at the elite level? Or are you moving between boats and athletes, or do you keep a distance so you keep that sense of personality controlling? How do you kind of balance being close to the guys but being far enough away to be able to kind of direct them when you need to?
I don't think there's any easy answer for that. It's very much a middle ground. Weirdly, part of the sort of selection for coxing this year was a bit of an interview, and they asked a very similar question, where it's like, do you see the role of the cox as being part of the coaching team or part of the athletes? And I think it's neither. I think I completely agree with you that it's, you're very much part of the athletes, because there needs to be that element of trust. When you're in the thick of a race and all the rowers are going hard as nails, you don't want an outsider. You want someone who's been there with you through it, and you trust the person in front of you pulling as hard as they can, and trust the person behind you pulling as hard as they can. And you want to make sure that the cox is just as much a part of that. They know the ins and outs of the boat, and they know what your motivations are. They know what you're afraid of, and they know exactly how you tick as a person. And I think there has to be an element of, friendship, maybe a bit of friendships, but certainly strong camaraderie, and like an understanding of like peership there. But at the same time, you can be very, very helpful to the coach in a way that maybe the athletes can't. Think little things like a rower might have like a niggle in their rib, and they might just brush it off with friends like, I'm a little bit sort of sore today, but they won't tell that to the coach, because maybe they don't want to lose their seat, or they think that they might get dropped for something. And so that there's little strings to like both avenues that you really have to sort of dance a tightrope on. And I think the further you go down the road with coxing, the more you sort of work out where you sort of need to sit. But it's tough. It's very much like a middleman job.
So, as a cox, you're putting yourself into the mind of the captain of the team. You're going to very much take responsibility almost for everything that goes wrong, share the credit for everything that goes right. That seems like a lot of pressure there. And how do you manage that side of things within yourself? Because, physically, I imagine you're kind of putting yourself through the ringer to be a cox in the same way that, in a different way to the guys hauling on the oar. But what do you do to sort of like, right, keep yourself centered, keep yourself balanced when you're, in the run up to things like the World Championships and you're 2 years out?
I think, there's a facet of it is a little bit of sports psychology, really. Like I've got to admit, being on the start line of the World Championships, I'm absolutely like, I'm terrified. Like I still get nervous. It doesn't matter if it's the World Championships or whether it's Chester Regatta. Like I love that feeling of being on the start line and just having those little nerves of being like, oh, what's going to happen here? But I think one way that you've got to be quite strong and resilient as a Cox is that, a lot of your outward actions and how you speak and how you move and how you hold yourself, that is something that will rub off on other people. So I think in a weird sort of way, trying to sort of like separate how you feel and how you act is quite a difficult thing to get right, and it's something that takes quite a bit of practice. But knowing full well that I'm nervous, I really, really hope that this next race is going to go well, doesn't impact on me acting absolutely confident, being very clear with what I want and how I ask for it. And I think that there's a few little things that I do to help that, just going over in my mind that you can only control what you can control. People will go as fast as they can go. Like you can do nothing to any of the other boats. All you can do is try and just concentrate on your boat and make that go well. And there's lots of little snippets of sports psychology that do filter in. But ultimately, it's the ability to act like you've got all of the cards, because you know that the rowers are probably going to be quite nervous as well. So if you radiate that confidence, then there will be faith in you and trust in you that you can actually make the right call, and you've got to trust yourself that you can make the right call. So there's a lot of pressure there, and it's learning how to deal with that pressure.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just heard the first pitch for Harry Brightmore, CEO coaching, and executive management. I mean, do you think that actually is? I mean, is that something you can teach people? I mean, there's like, you seem like a really kind of confident, easygoing, forward guy, but how much of that have you learnt to bring in, and how much of it's like, I've been like this since I was 6?
I personally know that it's very learned. I'm actually quite introverted at the best of times. I really like my own space, don't like talking to people. I'll just quite happily shut myself in my room, read a book, play a game, and that'll be me for the rest of the day. But when I come to rowing, I know that I've sort of learned this role and I portray this role, and I love doing that. It's not like it's a chore or anything like that, but I think you can learn these things, absolutely. And I think it takes quite a bit of processing and practicing, going through those hard experiences, to be able to sort of like work through the nitty-gritty of those pressure points and how you can deal with them better. And obviously it's not something you can just fix overnight. Like, if you're sort of scared of something or you get nervous about something quite easily, it obviously takes time to work through that. But I think it's very doable. And I think once you start thinking in certain ways, the fear of what if does become a little bit lessened. If it sounds so silly when you say something like control the controllables. It's like, if you're really scared that another boat is going to power ahead, and when someone says to you, well, can you stop them powering ahead? No, of course you can't. So why are you worried about it? It's completely out of your hands. And there's obviously plenty of other stuff. I'm no sports psychologist by any stretch. I'm just trying to piece it together in my own mind. But yeah, it's sometimes things just click in place, and you just think, actually, like, yeah, why does that bother me? It's very weird, but you start to work these things out, and it does make it seem clearer.
So it's almost like, and this is probably the wrong way to phrase this, Harry, so please don't take it the wrong way. It's almost like a confidence trick. Your crew sees you acting confidently. You're organized, you're together on the start line, you're being very direct with what you're asking from them. And because you look confident and you're transmitting confidence and also competence, they go, oh, well, it's okay. Harry's fine. So that helps them to then also feel confident and competent.
Yeah, absolutely. That is exactly the end goal of what we're trying to get across. Yeah.
So, and this is a question based upon, if you row with people for long enough. I mean, rowers as a tribe tend to be fairly opinionated, fairly strong-willed individuals. Everyone knows what's wrong with the boat, and it's not them. It's someone in bows not tapping down properly or whatever. A lot of coxing is understanding what different athletes need at different points. If in hour 8, if Ben was having a bad day, he probably needed chocolate. I responded to being shouted at, that kind of thing. How do you look at the athletes that you're working with and go, right, he needs an arm around the shoulder, he needs a kick up the backside, he needs a pat on the back? Is there like a black book where you kind of work out their psychology and then what you can do to engage with it?
Yeah, completely. It's quite funny actually. Like, the longer this conversation goes on, it's like, obviously coxing is a very rowing specific role, but there is probably a good 2/3 of it which has nothing to do with rowing, and everything to do with man management, organization, sports psychology, all of these little facets to it. Like over a year of rowing with a crew, a year plus actually, some of the guys that were in our 8 this season for World Championships I've lived with at uni, I've known for nearly 10 years. You know exactly what makes these guys tick, and you can tell when they're nervous, you can tell when they're actually just being bloody annoying and actually do need a kick up the backside, and if they're getting cocky, you can bring them back down to earth. You're working through just normal relationships with your friends and your colleagues, and you get to work people out, and that's a huge part of it. And obviously you're in a special position to act positively on that and try and really help people and get the best out of people. And quite often you find that when you're sensible with that and you use that responsibility properly, that people do end up confiding in you a bit more and trying to, if they don't feel confident in saying something in the boat because, they thought, oh, well, actually, I felt like this was happening today, they'll talk to me about it and sort of have a conversation with me rather than trying to sort of pitch into the whole crew and risk being shot down or getting into an argument or anything. So you sort of like bouncing and feeding off each other all the time. And yeah, you do unlock like a good relationship with all of these guys when you're spending so much time together. So yeah, you work out how they all work.
So in that case, because a lot of coxers in boats, you tend to get a lot of technical calls. Would you almost say that there are technical calls that you can make that will make a difference, but also, and especially in the heat of a race, it's almost the psychological calls that make the difference too? Yeah,
I think in training, like the technical calls are key. I would say in the racing, like there's something's going drastically wrong in a Nate's race, there's not a lot of time to sort of fix it and get it back. It is really like a drag race. So it's almost like I'd liken it to you practice perfecting this race plan time and time and time again. And then when you get to the race, it pretty much just goes in the blink of an eye. And you just try and execute the plan as well as you possibly can do. I think maybe in the small boats, you get a little bit more room for tactics and people pace things quite differently. But yeah, certainly for the racing, it's more about the calls are geared around executing a plan in terms of pacing, in terms of, just giving people information of where the other crews are, where we are on the course, the time, we're 2 minutes in, 3 minutes in kind of thing. There will be some technical calls in there just as reminders, usually in the second half when people are getting pretty tired. But yeah, for that race, it will be generally executing a plan. In the training session, there's a lot more time and energy spent on trying to make those strokes really good. So that will sort of take up a lot more of the conversation.
So, I mean, okay, to talk about the race itself, because it was a pretty impressive one. In the final, I mean, like I said, I was just watching it back before we started the recording. It seemed as though the GB boat had everybody else seemed as though they were just banging away at like 44 strokes a minute or something, and you guys seem much more relaxed. It did seem kind of a little bit longer, a little bit more fluid. Is that something that's been a positive choice, right? You're going to row like this, or was this just something that's come together from the 8 guys there? This is how we do it.
Yeah, Paul Stannard, the head coach, said at the start of the year that the length of strokes was going to be a priority. So that's been on our mind for the whole season. You can see that across the board with all of the other British boats. So yeah, that hasn't just been a chance thing. But I think for our race in particular, we knew that we had a fast first 500 without having to take extra strokes. And we always had this sort of philosophy of, you will go quickest over 2K if you flat pace it. Going faster in that first 500 takes quite a bit more energy to do. So we already knew that we could go out quite quickly at quite a sort of steady rating. So we thought, well, I mean, we know our speed. If people lead us, they lead us. But we're confident that actually this style of rowing will get us from A to B quicker. So yeah, watching back the race, I'm sure a lot of the other boats were probably thinking, right, well, let's try and blast out and see if we can get a nose ahead of the British. And I think certainly for the first 2 minutes, I don't really remember looking out. I don't think I gave any calls about where we were on the other crews, because actually it was irrelevant. We were just straight on our pace, hold our pace. And actually after about 2 minutes or so, when I did start sort of looking across and saying to the guys where we were, I think, we were a few seats up and we were looking quite composed and quite calm, and there was plenty of space to go. So yeah, it's weird how it was just very, very internal. It was just, we were just concentrating on us.
It also seemed like it was, I mean, I'm sort of like drilling down into like really, I suppose, advanced international stuff, but it seemed very much like it was a very quick race. Everything was like about it's 1 minute 20 500s the whole way down. I mean, that's it. Again, it didn't look as though there was a screaming tailwind. It just seemed like it was a nice lake on a nice day. but very much it seems if you're racing in an 8 now, you're looking at closer to a 5-minute race than a 6-minute race. Is that changing anything in the way that people prepare?
I think it does change the way that people race an 8. And I think not even being part of the Great Britain 8, I think that's something that we focused on heavily at Oxford Brookes in all of the really like top end 8s that those guys have been churning out over the last few years. You know, we've had a strong philosophy of, you know, trying to get to the 1,000, get to 1,500 as fast as humanly possible and cling on for the rest of the way. Because I think one of the interesting thing with the 8 compared to certainly the pair, but also a little bit the 4 is the more moving parts you've got, and the faster that the boat moves, the amount of effort to increase the speed when it's already going near top speed is massive. And if you're trying to organize that in the last 500, it's not impossible to do, but it makes it incredibly difficult. And you need to have prepared to be ready to, you know, it's essentially like dropping your split on an ergo, like 5 splits. You need to be prepared for everybody in the boat to be ready to absolutely drop the hammer. And it doesn't really work that way. It's very, very difficult to do. Whereas in the pair, when it's just 2 of you, you get an immediate feedback as soon as one person starts trying harder. Obviously, that's doubled if both of you start trying harder. It's very, very easy to do. And because the boat is quite light, it jumps straight away. Whereas an 8 is nearly 100 kilograms. You've got all the oars, which, you know, that's another few kilograms. You've got the weight of the Cox. It is a heavy thing that carries its momentum well, but doesn't accelerate fast.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's been the running joke that it's over a number of decades now that usually the 8 that gets to 500 first will win the race. And it doesn't always work like that, but it's quite often the case. You don't usually come through last place at 500 and then end up winning. Whereas you do get that in the pairs.
Yeah.
It's really hard to change speed in an 8 once it's up and running because like you say, there's so many moving parts. This kind of flat pacing, we talked to Eric Murray a little while ago, and he talked about there was a point where they used to get ahead and then look back on races, and then they went for the flat pacing across you know, from 0 to 2,000 meters. And our old coach Peter Holmes, brother of the late Andy Holmes, used to say, look, the fastest way from A to B is as fast as you can possibly make it. If you need to rely on pushes and sprints, then you're probably not going hard enough. Is that a philosophy that has come out of technical and physiological talks with the team? Has this been decided as kind of a policy going forward? We're just going to be fast from A to B. If someone leads us at 500, we're confident that our speed over the course is the one that's going to get us to the line first.
I wouldn't say it's been like a policy that's been drummed into us. I think we've just got a lot of quite sensible and race savvy athletes in the team, and athletes that are vitally confident in what they can produce in terms of their performance. You know, like I think a lot of these guys know their bodies inside and out, and they know exactly, you know, they wake up, their heart rate's this, they will be feeling a certain way. They will know pretty much down to a split or so what they'd be able to produce in terms of a performance on that day. And I think it's it shows that there's a lot of like maturity of the guys that have come through at the moment, that they are able to race that way, because it's obviously, you know, it's quite takes quite a lot to be able to just go out into a World Championships final and say, right, well, we're just if people lead us, that's fine. It's not a problem. We're just going to do what we're going to do. We always sort of equate it back to if you were going to do a 2K on a rowing machine, you wouldn't blast a 500 as quick as you possibly can to try and get ahead of someone else, because you know that the next 4 or 5 minutes are probably going to be pretty horrible. And okay, in the 8, that is part of the nature of the beast. Like, everyone does try and get out quite fast, and there is an element of you need a lot of power to get the thing up and moving. But generally, we're not trying to go to 500 any quicker than we think we need to. We're actually, if anything, going into the World Championships, we were trying to make our second 500 a bit quicker. But I think it's just a lot of mature racers that know what they're capable of, and when it's coming down to those final few placings, if you're not sure where you're going to sit in the medals, and you want to make sure that you get your best performance possible to get that extra 0.1 of a second, there's no point in trying to spend anything silly when you know exactly the way to get the most out of yourself, if that makes sense. Usually it's a case of fear to try and exert yourself harder in a certain pace in the race.
Fair enough. So, Harry, we said we'd do this a little bit earlier in the pod, but we're kind of like, about 2/3 of the way through. I just wanted to say, I believe a relative of yours is doing a little bit of fundraising at the moment, and possibly something you want to mention?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just a little shout out to my sister, who is running the London Marathon tomorrow. And she's running for Meningitis Now, in memory of a friend of hers from uni who unfortunately passed away from meningitis very suddenly. But yeah, she's been training like an absolute madman. She's been smashing out 20k runs, more than I've been doing, that's for sure. She's absolutely nuts. But yeah, she's got a Just Giving page. So if you search Alice Brightmore, there's a little thumbnail for Meningitis Now London Marathon. So yeah, if anyone feeling generous or inclined to give a bit towards meningitis, then absolutely try and give her a little bit of a donation, and hopefully she finishes the marathon.
I'm sure she will.
Excellent.
We'll put the link up on our Twitter feed as well, and also on the episode, so that she has a little bit of if that helps bring some more pennies in, that would be great.
Amazing. Thank you very much, guys.
No,
she appreciates that very much.
A pleasure. As we were chatting about earlier, I mean, we've been very grateful for at my club for online fundraising efforts, and we're about to put that to good use, getting some trees cleared. So looking forward to the future, like you said, you've got a lot of people with their eyes on the next race, basically. In terms of kind of like the grand sweep of modern British rowing, we obviously had a bit of a dip at Tokyo. I mean, are you now just, can you really take much from the World Championships in 2022, saying what's going to happen in 2024? Or is that just like, right, job done, let's start the next year?
I don't think there's loads to be sort of going off to predict what's going to happen in Paris. I think 2022 has been a great season for British rowing, but as far as we're concerned as athletes, obviously we look at it all quite brutally, and we've pretty much got to draw a line under that. All the sort of previous form doesn't really matter now. We're going into a brand new season, and I think it's down to us to try and replicate what we've done this season. It'll be hard, and we've set a standard for the world, and I'm sure that the world will respond pretty viciously and come back at us fighting. But we do a hell of a lot of work on our own metrics. We've got all of our times all stored in databases and stuff. We know the standard that we need to hit. So, it's back to the drawing board and trying to see if we can improve on the performances from this year.
And when we spoke to Mark Davis, he mentioned, just thinking about it, he was quite good at coxing too, and so there's a future job for you. But yeah, he mentioned there was like a Paris simulator. That you've got the rowing machines up in a kind of like big kind of IMAX of the Paris course. Is that something that you've been having a go at? Is that kind of like mental visualization part of the toolkit?
I haven't had to go on that. I know that the para team have been to the Paris course this season. I believe that the Junior World Championships will be at the Paris course next year as well, in the year before the Olympics. But I don't think we'll have had any much visualization stuff going on. I mean, to be honest, rowing is it's probably like a bit like a swimming pool, really. The water's there, the buoy line is there. You line up, they say attention, go. We just try and make the boats go quickly.
Fair enough.
Can I ask? We as rowers, we've all had the kind of the selection process. Even at club level, there's some kind of process that involves you getting your, that results in you getting your seat in the boat or not getting your seat in the boat. We know that GB athletes follow a similar program. We know that there are trials and tests and everything is stored. We also know, having talked to people like Andy and Jack, that sometimes the metrics might look the same. Sometimes a coach might have to go on intangibles in picking athlete A over athlete B or athlete B over athlete C. Could you talk us through what the selection process for a Cox looks like and how you prepare for that and then go through that process?
So the coxing select, you start off at the November trials in Boston, Lincolnshire, and pretty much there just to help out with and facilitate the small boats trials for the rowers. But you sort of sign up and show your interest there, and then as you get through the season, there is some more trials. I think it's a little bit different in the senior national team. For like the juniors under 23s, there's like little sort of weekends or weeks where all of the athletes are bundled together and you mix and match in boats and stuff, and the coxers will get obviously heard by the athletes, and the athletes will provide feedback to the coaches. The coxers have to take recordings of themselves and give those back to the coaches as well, and it runs in a pretty similar way in the senior team as well. So obviously there was an extensive period of trialing this year for the coxing seat, and it runs to a very similar tune, really. There's periods where you'll be sat in the 8 and the athletes will give feedback to the coaches, and you have to give recordings to the coach and they listen through it. And so for example, I handed in 3 recordings in a period of time, where one was like just a practice training session. There was one where it was like a sort of low rate piece, just gauging how you sort of respond with that. And then the third one was like a flat out piece. And, so you get a bit of a picture of how the cox is responding to certain stimulus. And yeah, then it's up to the coaches to make a decision from there. So
you actually, I'm really intrigued by that. You actually record yourself and then the coaches kind of review it and look at the inputs that you're making.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty cool. I don't think we ever did that at Agecroft. although to be fair with Maddie and Lucy, I think the coaches could hear them even when we were at opposite ends of the breach. Just to kind of come back to that, you've been in and around for quite some time. You've won the World Championships. Are you kind of looking forward to being? And I guess you've already been part of a cycle, but you're now kind of you're in the hot seat. It's a little bit like you've got the starting role, or does it actually now at the start of the season does everything reset and you're fighting for your seat just as much as everybody else is in the boat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm already sort of fully planning to sort of fight for my seat again. It does start from square one, and you know all of the seats are now blank. But the coaches understandably will take past performances into account to an extent. But ultimately, you know, we have to start from square one and give everyone a fair crack of the whip to try and prove themselves again. So yeah, it's absolutely up to me to try and fight for my seat again, which I agree with. I think that is the right way to be. Yeah.
Okay, so it's nice to have won, but there are no guarantees. But that keeps everyone progressing and reaching forward for the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I learned being at Oxford Brookes, and obviously they're, you know, infamous for having just so many rowers and churning out so many eights. And actually whenever I was sort of describing what it was like at Brookes to someone, I'd always use the analogy of it being a bit like shark teeth. You know, you have to be really on your game and hold your seat down, you know, every day, because if you're not on it, there is 4 other people who can do exactly the same job as you. So it's, you know, it's something that I've learned over a good few years there. It's a very valuable lesson that I've taken with me, that, you know, even when you're riding high and things are going well, I think you just got to keep pushing on.
Okay. I mean, to sort of like properly look to the future, I'm going to admit this is like a little bit of a thing that's been going around my head. LA is going to be run over a 1,500 meter course, and you guys have, you know, you've said a couple of times now that actually the plan is to get to 1,500 meters in the absolute best position and then hang on for dear life. Do you think that, you know, are there already plans to change things for the slightly shorter course, or is it not going to make much difference? Because I'm kind of aware that based on your times, you're going to be aiming for like a gold medal standard time, probably a good 10 seconds below 4 minutes. I mean, you're going to be around about 3:45, 3:55, depending on conditions. Is that going to change how we train people in the 8, let's say, to people in the pair who are still going to be doing a 5-minute race?
I think, well, there's quite a few interesting things around LA. So obviously the LA Olympics will be over 1,500, but quite interesting. I mean, I could well be wrong. I think the World Championships from the year before will be over 2,000 meters.
Okay.
So it poses quite a few problems, because first of all, you've got to qualify your boats for the Olympics over 2,000 meters. But then when you get to the Olympics, you're going to be racing over 1,500. I think I don't know. I'm just, you know, soldier on the ground. I don't know what's going to be set in terms of sort of the training schedule and the training plan, but I would imagine that things won't change drastically. I think it will just be a case of pacing it harder. You might find that ratings come up slightly because people can maybe get away with being less efficient on a shorter race and trying to just keep chucking power at it. I can't see things changing massively. I think the athletes are a little bit
I'm not sure I understand.
Sorry, that was my watch kicking off there. I think people are maybe a little bit disappointed that it's not the same as, you know, all of the other racing in terms of the athletes. But I think, you know, to be able to work with the IOC is probably a better thing than not at this stage. But yeah, I don't think loads will change.
Fair enough. Okay, now, Harry, this is my one last question. I've kind of left it to the end in case you storm off in fury and disgust. But you appear to be, and this is a theory that we've had on the pod for a while, you appear to be a member of the last minority in the UK that it's legal to discriminate against, the gingers. Now, I fundamentally believe that gingers are better at Olympic sports. It's not like a perfect thing, but if you look since about 1980 at the list of gold medal winners, the number of people who are ginger in there, or at the very least strawberry blonde, is significantly greater than the number of people who are ginger in the population. Is this something that you've noticed in your life? It's just like, you know, kind of like just seeing as you've climbed up the ladder of elite sports.
I think it's a fact that we're a dying breed, and I think we've just all ultimately understood that we're going to go out with a bang. Yeah, I have to say I haven't really noticed it myself. Obviously, Will Satch springs to mind. Greg Rutherford from the was he at Rio, or he definitely got gold at London.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting actually. There's I'm trying to think if there's any others kicking around.
Hodge was
there are a few coming through the under-23s as well, actually, that I've noticed. A few very good rowers coming through that are ginger.
Lewin's theory is that because they have a harder time in the playground as they're growing up, it makes them tougher. And he keeps bringing this theory up, but he hasn't actually done any scientific research on it, you know, to kind of back his theory. But
I might back the trend on that. I didn't have too much of a bad time in the playground. Not as much, well, as good as anyone else, really. But yeah, maybe it was just that sort of confidence personified that managed to just get me away with it every time. Managed to just avoid it and brush it off.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for not like just slamming the stop button on that one. But it is something that genuinely interests me. That I think it goes back quite a long way. That there's just been this kind of hang on. He's got very ruddy hair there. There's another one that's won a gold medal, and yeah, like Aaron said, this is very much a feeling rather than me actually going through the list of all the gold medalists and go, yeah. But I mean, okay, to give you an example, it's slightly distorted by the Chris Hoy effect.
Yeah.
And you know, he's on the kind of like blonde ginger continuum, but I just think it's like there's something there personally. I need more investigation.
I think there's evidence to suggest that redheads have a slightly higher pain threshold, and I don't think I'm just saying that. I'm fairly sure I've read that somewhere. I don't know how true that is. Yeah.
Well, you've just thrown petrol on Lewin's fire there.
There we go. There's something else to investigate.
Yeah, so maybe it's a bit of homework for you to go away from there, and maybe you can work something out.
It all started with an offhand flippant comment from an old rowing friend of mine called James Knight, who basically said every boat needs a ginger. It's just like, you're not going to win, you've got to have a ginger. And so yeah, I personally believe that one. I don't know whether I'm being a plonker or not, but
I'd agree with it.
Fair enough. Aaron, Should we ask anything else of great, deep meaningfulness at this point?
I think we've kept this world champion long enough. Harry, is there anything or anyone else that you would like to mention or bring up before we let you go off and polish your gold medal? In the same way that perhaps Bilbo used to polish the ring, going, "My precious, my precious." But we already know now that you're already looking ahead. Is there anything else you'd like to mention, Harry? It's been a pleasure having you on.
No, it's been a pleasure to be on as well. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Good stuff.
Harry
Not many of
Brightmore.
our guests say that, but thank you. That's nice.
Harry, thank you very much for coming on. Harry Brightmore, ladies and gentlemen, world champion Cox of the GB Men's 8. It's been great.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.